The champagne in her glass was vintage, the view from the 42nd floor was impeccable, and the man holding her waist was the CEO, a man married to someone else. It was the perfect picture of success, until a flash of camera light from a dark corner turned the evening into a prelude to disaster. We often think we are the masters of our own narratives, watching the world from behind glass, never realizing that someone else has been reading our unredacted files all along. If you find yourself drawn to the silence before the storm and the stories hiding behind closed office doors, stay with me. There are many more secrets to uncover in this city, and I'd hate for you to miss the truth when it finally breaks. The problem with the 42nd floor wasn't the height, it was the reflection. At night, when the interior lights of the Vanguard Holdings Executive Lounge were dimmed to a sultry amber, and the city outside was nothing but a grid of cold, electric stars, the windows became mirrors. Elena Vance stood near the floor-to-ceiling glass, clutching a flute of champagne that had grown warm in her hand 10 minutes ago. She wasn't looking at the Manhattan skyline. She was looking at the reflection of the man standing 3 feet behind her left shoulder. Julian Thorne, CEO, husband to a woman currently vacationing in the Hamptons. And the reason Elena's hands were trembling, just enough to create ripples in her wine. "You're tense," Julian said. His voice was low, a baritone rumble that used to make her stomach flip with desire. Now it just sounded like a threat. "The quarterly numbers are due Monday, Julian," Elena replied, keeping her back to him. She adjusted the strap of her emerald silk dress, a piece of fabric that cost more than most people's cars. "And the variance report, the numbers in the logistics division aren't matching the invoices." Again. Julian stepped closer. She could smell his cologne, sandalwood and expensive scotch. It was the scent of power, but tonight it smelled like rot. "That's why you're the VP of operations, Elena. You fix the variance. You make it match." "It's not a rounding error this time," she whispered, finally turning to face him. The lounge was crowded with board members, investors, and high-level staff, a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. They were safe in the hum of conversation, but barely. "It's $4 million, Julian. I can't just move that to miscellaneous expenses without flagging compliance." Julian's smile didn't reach his eyes. He reached out, his fingers grazing her bare elbow, a touch that looked proprietary to anyone watching, intimate to anyone knowing, and terrifying to Elena. "Compliance is a guideline, darling, not a god. Fix it, or do I need to find someone with a bit more imagination?" He didn't wait for an answer. He patted her arm, turned, and dissolved back into the crowd, laughing instantly at a joke made by a potential investor. Elena felt the air leave her lungs. She needed to breathe. She needed to not be here. She turned sharply, heading for the terrace doors. The winter air bit her skin the moment she stepped out, a sharp contrast to the stifling heat of the party. The terrace was empty, save for a few smokers huddled near the far railing. Elena moved to a secluded corner, hidden by a large potted ornamental spruce. She set her glass on the stone railing and gripping the cold metal, closing her eyes. Fix it, that was all she ever did. She fixed his schedule, she fixed his ego, and for the last 2 years, she had been fixing his theft. "You dropped this." The voice was soft, hesitant. Elena's eyes snapped open. She spun around, adrenaline spiking. A man was standing there. He was holding her clutch, a small silver thing she hadn't even realized slipped from her fingers when she grabbed the railing. He looked unremarkable. That was the only word for him. He was wearing a gray suit that was a size too big in the shoulders, the fabric slightly shiny under the terrace lights. His tie was a dull navy, knotted slightly askew. He had glasses that slid down his nose, and he was holding a stack of file folders against his chest with his other arm, looking completely out of place at a black tie gala. He wasn't an executive. He wasn't an investor. He was staff, probably one of the temps sent up from the basement to manage the coat check or organize the gift bags. "Thank you," Elena said. Her voice clipped. She snatched the bag from his hand, not making eye contact. She turned back to the railing, dismissing him. He didn't leave. "It's a nice view," the man said. He moved a step closer to the railing, but kept a respectful distance. although the wind shear up here makes it feel about 10 degrees colder than street level. Elena stared at the city lights. She didn't want conversation. She wanted silence. She wanted the $4 million problem to vanish. Is there something you need? No, he said. He shifted the folders in his arms. I just saw you come out. You looked like you were about to jump or scream. I figured returning the bag might be a good distraction. Elena turned to look at him fully for the first time. He had kind eyes. Hazel, maybe? It was hard to tell in the shadow, but there was something in his gaze, an intelligence that didn't match the cheap suit. It unsettled her. She felt exposed, as if this nobody had seen the cracks in her porcelain shell just by watching her walk through a door. The shame of Julian's threat, the guilt of the fraud, and the sheer exhaustion of maintaining her perfect persona suddenly coalesced into anger. And here was a safe target. Do you make a habit of analyzing the guests? Elena asked, her voice dropping to a temperature far below the freezing air. Or are you just slacking off? The man blinked, seemingly unsurprised by her tone. I'm just observing. It's part of the job. Your job, Elena said, gesturing vaguely at his armful of files, is to file papers and ensure the executives have what they need, not to offer psychological assessments to the vice president of operations. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a second, Elena felt a flicker of doubt. He wasn't flinching. Everyone has a breaking point, Ms. Vance, he said quietly, even vice presidents. Excuse me? Elena stepped closer, using her height and her heels to loom over him. You don't know me. You don't know what I do. You don't know the weight I carry. And quite frankly, you are not paid enough to have an opinion on my breaking point. She saw a flash of something in his eyes. Pity, amusement. It made her furious. I suggest you go back inside, Elena hissed, her voice trembling, not with cold, but with misdirected rage. Find the co-check manager and ask for something to do, because right now you are just a clerk standing in the way of people who actually matter. The wind howled between the buildings, stripping away the silence. The man stood there for a long moment. He adjusted his glasses. He didn't apologize. He didn't bow his head. He just nodded. Once, slowly. I'll get out of your way, Ms. Vance, he said. His voice was devoid of malice, which somehow made it worse. Enjoy the evening. He turned and walked back toward the glass doors, clutching his files. Elena watched him go, feeling a strange, hollow victory. She had put him in his place. She had reasserted her dominance. She turned back to the city, taking a deep breath, waiting for the satisfaction to settle in. It didn't. Instead, the image of his calm hazel eyes lingered in her mind, like a ghost in the machine. She checked her watch, 9:45 p.m. Inside the ballroom, Julian was laughing. Somewhere in the server room, 3 floors down, a digital ledger was bleeding money. And Elena Vance stood alone in the cold, unaware that the man she had just dismissed as just a clerk was holding the folder that contained her entire professional autopsy. She finished her champagne and went back inside. She had a variance to fix. Monday mornings at Vanguard Holdings were not designed for comfort. They were designed for intimidation. The executive boardroom was a masterpiece of aggressive architecture. A 30-foot table of black obsidian, chairs that cost more than a mortgage payment, and floor-to-ceiling windows that allowed the morning sun to slash through the room like a blade. Elena sat in her usual spot to the right of the CEO's empty chair. She had arrived at 6:45 a.m., needing 45 minutes to ensure her concealer effectively hid the fact that she hadn't slept. The variance report was done, well, it was a lie, a beautiful, meticulously constructed lie that balanced the books by shifting the $4 million deficit into projected Q3 logistics expansion. It would hold. It had to. Around the table, the other executives were settling in. Andrew, the CFO, was aggressively tapping on his tablet. Marcus, VP of Sales, was nursing a venti coffee and looking green around the gills. The Gala's open bar had claimed another victim. The double doors swung open. Julian walked in first, radiating that infuriating, effortless vitality. He looked rested, sharp, and entirely unbothered by the financial precipice they were dancing on. Good morning, everyone, Julian announced, taking a seat. He didn't look at Elena. He never did in these meetings. Before we get to the departmental updates, we have a slight change in protocol today. The board has requested an external review of our operational efficiency before the merger talks proceed next month. Elena's pen froze in her hand. External review? Julian hadn't mentioned this. It's just a formality, Julian continued, waving a dismissive hand. Standard due diligence. They've sent over a consultant to verify our workflows. Please give him full cooperation so we can get him out of here as quickly as possible. He gestured to the door. Come on in. The heavy mahogany door opened again. Elena prepared herself to see a slick, aggressive corporate shark. Someone in a bespoke Italian suit with a briefcase full of jargon. Instead, a man walked in wearing a gray suit that fit poorly in the shoulders. His tie was a dull navy, and he was adjusting his glasses with a habitual, unassuming gesture. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Elena felt a physical blow to her chest, as if the obsidian table had just slammed into her ribs. It was him, the clerk, the man from the balcony. He walked to the front of the room with a quiet, shuffling gait that seemed almost apologetic. He placed a stack of files on the table, the same files he had been clutching on the terrace. He didn't look nervous. He looked bored. This is Lucas Morrow, Julian introduced him, checking his notes as if he couldn't be bothered to remember the name. From Sterling and Houge. The room went dead silent. Sterling and Houge wasn't a consultancy firm. It was a forensic accounting firm. They didn't do efficiency reviews. They did autopsies. Thank you, Mr. Thorne, Lucas said. His voice was the same, calm, soft, terrifyingly steady. He looked up, and his gaze swept the table, bypassing the nervous sales VP and the arrogant CFO. His eyes landed on Elena. There was no smirk, no flash of anger from Saturday night, just a neutral, hazel recognition that lasted a fraction of a second too long. As Mr. Thorne said, I'm here to review the operational and financial workflows, Lucas said to the room. My primary focus will be on the discrepancy between logistics invoicing and capital expenditure. Elena's blood turned to ice. That was exactly where she had hidden the money. I'll be setting up in the operations wing, Lucas continued. He turned his body slightly, addressing her directly for the first time. Ms. Vance, I believe that is your department? Elena forced her jaw to unclench. She forced her spine to straighten against the leather chair. She was the vice president. She was untouchable. It is, she said. Her voice was steady, but it felt thin, brittle. We run a very tight ship, Mr. Morrow. I'm not sure what you expect to find. Lucas nodded slowly. He opened the top folder on his stack. I expect to find the truth, Ms. Vance, whatever that looks like. He closed the folder. And please, don't worry about standing in my way. I'm very good at working around obstacles. The echo of her own insult hung in the air between them, invisible to everyone else, but deafening to her. You are just a clerk standing in the way of people who actually matter. Julian drummed his fingers on the table. Right, well, Lucas, get to it. Elena, give him whatever access he needs. Let's get this meeting started. Lucas gathered his files and moved to a side table in the corner of the room. He sat down, opened his laptop, and disappeared into the background. Just another piece of furniture. But Elena could feel him there. She could feel his presence like a draft on the back of her neck. Every time she spoke, every time she presented a slide, she felt the weight of his attention. He wasn't just a clerk. He was the hunter she had invited into her home. And as she looked down at the variance report in front of her, she realized with sickening clarity, he wasn't here to fix the numbers. He was here to count the bodies. By Wednesday, Lucas Morrow had become the most dangerous thing in the office, invisible. He had declined the private office Elena offered him, choosing instead a small, unoccupied desk near the printer bay in the center of the operations floor. It was a strategic masterstroke. From there, he could see who came in early, who left late, and who printed documents they immediately shredded. He sat there for hours, a cup of lukewarm tea at his elbow, shuffling through physical invoices with a rhythmic swish, click that was starting to sound, to Elena's ears, like the ticking of a bomb. Elena sat in her glass-walled office, the door firmly shut, pretending to review the marketing budget. In reality, she was watching him. He was infuriatingly professional. He spoke politely to the junior analysts, asking them benign questions about filing systems and software glitches. He didn't interrogate, he chatted, and everyone, disarmed by his rumpled suit and soft voice, was chatting back. Her phone buzzed on the mahogany desk. A text from Julian. Get him out of the logistics files, now. Elena stared at the screen, a familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. Julian hadn't stepped foot in operations all week. He was up in the penthouse suite, issuing commands like a general who refused to visit the trenches. She stood up, smoothing her skirt, and walked out into the bullpen. The hum of the office dipped slightly as she passed. Her heels clicked with authority on the polished concrete floor. She approached Lucas's desk. He didn't look up immediately. He was highlighting a line on a shipping manifest with a yellow marker. "Mr. Morrow," Elena said. She kept her voice pleasant, loud enough for the nearby assistants to hear. "I hope you're finding everything you need." Lucas capped his highlighter and looked up. The overhead fluorescent light caught the rim of his glasses. "Ms. Vance, yes, your team has been very illuminating. I noticed you've pulled the archives for the Q2 logistics expansion," she said, gesturing to the stack of dusty binders on his desk. "That project is closed. The data is all digitized on the server. You don't need to waste your time with the paper trail." "I like paper," Lucas said simply. He tapped the binder. "Digital files can be edited, metadata can be scrubbed. But paper has a memory. Ink fades, but it doesn't change." He opened the binder he had been working on. "For instance, I noticed that 3 of the vendor invoices for site preparation in New Jersey are signed by the same person. M. Reynolds." Elena's heart skipped a beat. M. Reynolds was the maiden name of Julian's sister-in-law. It was sloppy, it was arrogant, it was exactly the kind of detail Julian told her not to worry about. "Reynolds is a common name," Elena said, her voice tight. "We use several contractors." "True," Lucas agreed. He leaned back in his cheap ergonomic chair, the mesh creaking. "But it is unusual for a site preparation vendor to also be billing for software consultation in the same month, at the same rate with the same signature. Don't you think?" He looked at her then, and for a moment the clerk mask slipped. The kindness she had seen on the balcony was gone, replaced by a clinical, razor-sharp focus. He wasn't asking a question. He was stating a fact. "I'll look into it," Elena said, trying to sound bored. "It's likely a clerical error." "I'm sure," Lucas said. He didn't close the binder. "Oh, and Ms. Vance, I'll need the original sign-off sheets for these expenses, the ones with the VP authorization." Her authorization, her signature. "Those are in deep storage," Elena lied. "It will take days to retrieve them." "I have time," Lucas said. "I'm not going anywhere." He held her gaze, and Elena realized with a jolt that he knew she was lying. He knew about the signatures. He might even know about Julian. She turned to leave, needing to escape his radius, but he spoke again, his voice dropping to a murmur that only she could hear. "I saw Mr. Thorne leaving your office earlier," Lucas said. He picked up his pen, twirling it idly. He looked upset. "I hope the stress of the audit isn't affecting morale." It was a warning. He had seen Julian storming out after their argument this morning. An argument where Julian had grabbed her wrist a little too hard and told her to fix the mess. Lucas had seen the cracks. "Mr. Thorne is a perfectionist," Elena said, her back to him. "We all are." "Perfection is a heavy burden," Lucas replied quietly, "especially when you're carrying it for someone else." Elena walked away without looking back. She went straight to her office, closed the door, and locked it. Her hands were shaking. She poured herself a glass of water, but couldn't drink it. From her window, she could see the reflection of the bullpen behind her. Lucas was back to work, his yellow highlighter moving across the page like a spotlight, illuminating the sins she had tried so hard to bury in the dark. "Fix him." The command was whispered, but in the acoustic perfection of the penthouse office, it sounded like a gunshot. Julian stood by the window, his silhouette cut sharply against the darkening skyline. He didn't look at Elena. He was pouring a drink, the crystal decanter clinking softly against the glass. "I'm trying, Julian," Elena said, her voice strained. She was sitting on the edge of the leather sofa, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "But he's diligent. He's cross-referencing everything. If I push too hard, he'll get suspicious. Julian turned, swirling the amber liquid. He's a man, Elena. He's a low-level number cruncher in a cheap suit who probably goes home to a microwave dinner and a cat. He's not a monk. He walked over to her, looming in that way that used to feel protective, but now felt suffocating. He reached out and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His fingers were cold. "You have a way with people," Julian murmured, his eyes scanning her face not with affection, but with appraisal. "You charm the board. You charm the Japanese investors. Charm him. Distract him. Make him feel important. Men like that are starving for validation." The implication hung in the air, heavy and rancid. "Use yourself." "You want me to seduce the auditor?" Elena asked, her voice flat. "I want you to save us," Julian corrected. He took a sip of his drink. "Take him to dinner, somewhere expensive, somewhere intimate. Find out what he knows, and then blur the lines. Make him hesitate before he writes your name in that report." 2 hours later, Elena sat in a booth at the Griffin, a dimly lit bistro in Tribeca, known for its privacy and its $300 tasting menu. She had changed her outfit. The severe office blazer was gone, replaced by a silk blouse in a soft cream color that caught the candlelight. She wore the diamond earrings Julian had given her last Christmas. Payment for silence, she realized now. Lucas Morrow arrived 5 minutes early. He was still wearing the gray suit, but he had removed his tie. He looked out of place among the velvet banquettes and the hushed conversations of the city's elite. "Ms. Vance," he said, sliding into the booth. He looked around the restaurant with mild curiosity, as if he were observing a zoo exhibit. "This is substantial for a working dinner." "Please call me Elena," she said, flashing the smile that had disarmed shareholders for 5 years. She poured him a glass of Pinot Noir. "And I thought we could step away from the fluorescent lights for an evening. Get to know each other without the files." Lucas accepted the wine but didn't drink it. He watched her over the rim of the glass. "I appreciate the gesture, but I imagine the files are the only reason we're here." Elena laughed, a light practiced sound. She leaned in slightly, invading his personal space just enough to signal interest. "You're very cynical, Lucas. Can't a colleague just want to buy you dinner? I feel we got off on the wrong foot at the gala. I was stressed. I wanted to apologize." "Apology accepted," Lucas said. He set the glass down. "But you didn't bring me to a place with a 6-month waiting list just to say sorry." Elena swirled her wine. "You're right. I brought you here because I wanted to understand you. You're brilliant, Lucas. I've seen your work this week. You see things others miss." "I see patterns," he corrected. "And what do you see when you look at me?" Elena asked, dropping her voice to a sultry register. She held his gaze, waiting for the inevitable flush, the awkward stutter she got from most men. Lucas didn't stutter. He didn't flush. He adjusted his glasses and looked at her with a clarity that made her skin crawl. "I see someone who is exhausted," he said quietly. Elena's smile faltered. "I work hard." "No," Lucas said. "I see someone who is performing. Even now, you poured the wine with your left hand, but you're holding the glass with your right so the light catches that bracelet. You leaned forward exactly 3 inches, the standard distance for intimacy in a business negotiation. You're running a play, Elena." He picked up his napkin and unfolded it slowly. "Mr. Thorne sent you, didn't he?" Elena froze. The air in her lungs seemed to solidify. "I don't know what you mean." "He's afraid," Lucas said, his voice devoid of judgment. "He knows I'm getting close to the logistics fund, so he sent his most valuable asset to neutralize the threat. He thinks because I wear a cheap suit, I'll be so flattered by the attention of a vice president that I'll forget how to do math." He looked at her then, and his eyes were sad. "The tragedy is, he doesn't respect you enough to realize how insulting this is to you. He's using you as a shield." Elena slammed her glass down. Wine sloshed onto the white tablecloth, a red stain spreading like blood. "You are crossing a line." "I'm auditing the line," Lucas countered gently. "You're wearing a ring on your right hand, emerald, beautiful, but you keep twisting it when you talk about him. It's a nervous tick. You're terrified of him." "I'm not terrified," Elena hissed. abandoning the seduction. I am loyal, something you clearly don't understand. Loyalty is a two-way street, Lucas said. I've looked at the emails, Elena. I've seen the timestamps. You authorized the transfers at 11 o'clock p.m., 1 a.m. You do the dirty work while he's at fundraisers. If this ship goes down, and it will, do you really think he has a life raft waiting for you? Elena stood up. Her legs were shaking. I'm leaving. The invoice for the software consultation in New Jersey, Lucas said, not looking up from the menu. The one signed by Emma Reynolds? I found the incorporation papers for that vendor. It's a shell company registered to a residential address in the Hamptons. He looked up at her, standing over the table. It's his wife's address, Elena. He's not just stealing from the company. He's funneling the money directly into his family trust. He's securing his future with his wife, using your signature to do it. Elena felt the room tilt. The noise of the restaurant rushed back in, clinking silverware, laughter, jazz. You're lying, she whispered. I don't lie, Lucas said. I count. He gestured to the empty seat. Sit down, order the sea bass. It's supposed to be excellent. And stop trying to save a man who has already sold you out. Elena stood there for a long, agonizing second. Then slowly she sank back into the booth. She didn't order the sea bass. She just stared at the red stain on the tablecloth, realizing that for the first time in years, the person across the table wasn't looking at her title or her body. He was looking at the wreckage. The rumor didn't start with a scream. It started with silence. When Elena walked into the office on Friday morning, 48 hours after the dinner with Lucas, the atmosphere had shifted. The usual low hum of keyboards and phone calls didn't greet her. Instead, as she pushed through the double-glass doors of the operations floor, heads turned, conversations stopped mid-sentence, eyes darted away, then back, sharp with a new, malicious curiosity. She kept her chin high, her bag gripped tightly in her hand. She was used to being watched. She was the vice president, after all. But this was different. This wasn't respect. This was the way people looked at a car crash. She reached her assistant's desk. Good morning, Sarah. Do you have the Q3 projections? Sarah, a young woman who usually greeted Elena with over-enthusiastic energy, didn't look up. She was staring at her monitor, her face flushed. I emailed them to you, Ms. Vance, last night. Fine, Elena said, sensing the chill. And get me coffee, black. I'm actually really busy with the audit requests, Sarah mumbled, finally glancing up. Her eyes flickered to something on her screen, then quickly away. There was judgment there, and pity. Elena felt a cold prickle of unease crawl up her spine. She walked into her office and closed the door, blinds still open. She sat down and unlocked her computer. Her inbox was full, but amidst the work emails, there was a notification from the company's internal messaging system, a direct message from the head of HR marked urgent confidential. Elena, please come to my office at 10 a.m. We need to discuss a complaint regarding workplace conduct. Elena frowned. Before she could process it, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Julian. Keep your head down today. Do not come to the penthouse. That was it. No explanation. No I love you. Just an order to disappear. She looked out through the glass wall of her office. Outside, in the bullpen, two analysts were huddled by the water cooler, looking at a phone and laughing. They glanced at her office, saw her watching, and dispersed immediately, guilty smiles plastered on their faces. It wasn't the fraud. If it were the fraud, there would be balkers, not giggles. It was them. Someone knew. Elena sat frozen, the realization washing over her like dirty water. Julian was married. She was his subordinate. In the corporate world, that wasn't a romance. It was a liability. And liabilities were liquidated. She needed to see him. She needed reassurance that they were in this together. Ignoring his text, she stood up and walked out, heading for the elevators. As she passed the central bank of desks, she saw Lucas. He was there, as always, invisible in his gray suit, stacking files. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the two analysts who had been laughing. Excuse me, Lucas said, his voice soft but cutting through the silence of the room. He stood up, blocking the path of one of the men. I believe this file is incomplete. What? The analyst sneered, annoyed at the interruption. I'm on break, man. I don't think you are. Lucas said calmly. He held up a folder. Because if you have time to circulate unverified gossip on company servers, you certainly have time to explain why your department's expense reports are missing receipts for the last 3 months. The analyst paled. That's a terminable offense, Lucas suggested. Or maybe just a mistake. Why don't you get back to your desk and find those receipts before I have to log it in my official report? The room went deadly quiet. The analyst scrambled back to his seat without a word. Lucas turned. He was standing directly in Elena's path to the elevators. For a second, she thought he would step aside, let her pass, let her run to Julian. Instead, he stepped forward, effectively blocking her route. "Ms. Vance," he said loud enough for the room to hear, "I need to review the sign-off protocols for the Jersey site, now." "I have a meeting," Elena said, her voice trembling. She tried to step around him. Lucas didn't move. He looked her dead in the eye, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of steel behind the hazel. "The meeting is canceled," he said. His voice was firm, authoritative. "The audit takes precedence. Please step into your office." "You can't tell me what to do," Elena hissed. "I am saving you," he whispered, so low only she could hear. "He's not upstairs, Elena. He left the building 20 minutes ago with his wife. If you go up there now, the only thing you'll find is his secretary telling you that you've been locked out of the executive suite." Elena stopped. The blood drained from her face. "With his wife." "Don't give them a show," Lucas said, his voice returning to a professional volume. "Back in your office, please." She looked around. Every eye in the room was on her, waiting for the meltdown, waiting for the crazy ex-girlfriend moment. Lucas stood there, a boring gray barrier between her and social suicide. He wasn't judging her. He was shielding her. Elena swallowed the scream building in her throat. She turned on her heel and walked back into her glass cage. Lucas followed her, closing the door firmly behind him. He pulled down the blinds, the first time anyone had dared to obscure the view of the VP's office. The room went dim. Elena sank into her chair, her legs giving way. "He's with her?" she whispered. "It's her birthday," Lucas said. He placed a file on her desk, not looking at her, giving her privacy even as he stood 3 feet away. He took the day off. He sent a memo to the entire staff about family time. Elena put her head in her hands. The text message, "Keep your head down," wasn't to protect her. It was to protect his family photo op. "Why did you stop me?" Elena asked, her voice muffled. "You know what I've done. You know I'm guilty. Why didn't you let me go up there and make a fool of myself? It would have made your job easier." Lucas pulled out a chair and sat down. He waited until she looked up. Her mascara was smudged, her perfect facade cracked wide open. "Because," Lucas said, adjusting his glasses, "the fraud is a crime. Being in love with a liar isn't. And I don't like seeing people punished for the wrong things." He opened the file. "Now, about the Jersey site. We need to talk about who actually signed these papers. Because I know it wasn't you." Elena stared at him. The enemy, the clerk, the man she had humiliated. He was the only person in the entire building who hadn't just watched her bleed. "It was me," she lied, the habit dying hard. "Elena," Lucas said, and the use of her first name sounded like a lifeline. "I can trace the IP address of the digital signature. It came from a computer in the CEO's office. I know you didn't sign it, but unless you tell me how he got your password, you're going to prison for him. Is he worth that?" Elena looked at the empty chair where Julian usually sat. She looked at the closed blinds, and then she looked at the man in the cheap suit who was offering her a way out. "He told me it was a glitch," she whispered. "He asked for my login to override a system error." Lucas uncapped his pen. "Tell me everything." The air in the office was thick, recycled, and suffocating. Lucas Morrow didn't speak immediately. He reached into his leather satchel, a worn thing that probably dated back to his college years, and pulled out a laptop. It wasn't the company-issued Dell. It was his own machine, sleek and black, free from the corporate spyware he was paid to install on everyone else's. He turned the screen toward Elena. "A glitch," Lucas repeated, the word rolling off his tongue like a bad taste. "That's a classic." He needed access to the logistics portal, Elena defended weakly, though the conviction was draining out of her with every second. He said the permissions were lagging. I gave him my credentials for one afternoon. One afternoon, Lucas murmured. He tapped a key. Look at this. A timeline appeared on the screen. It was a digital map of her life at Vanguard, visualized in stark blue bars. Login times, file access, authorizations. This is your user activity log, Lucas explained, his tone clinical. See these clusters? 11:45 p.m. on Tuesdays, 2 p.m. on Sundays, times when you were likely asleep or with him. Elena stared at the screen. The blue bars spiked on dates she recognized, dates when she had been exhausted, happy, thinking she was building a future with a man who understood her ambition. He didn't just use your login to approve the Jersey invoices, Elena. He used it to create a draft folder in your Outlook. Lucas clicked another window open. It displayed a series of emails. They were addressed to external vendors, shell companies, asking for kickbacks, discussing ways to hide funds, and explicitly mentioning hiding this from the CEO. They were written in her voice. They used her signature block, and they were saved in a hidden subdirectory of her sent folder. He wrote these, Lucas said softly. He never sent them. He just left them there. Do you know why? Elena shook her head, tears blurring her vision. No, because they are his insurance policy, Lucas said. He looked at her, and the pity in his eyes was replaced by a hard, urgent intensity. If an audit ever happened, if I ever happened, he didn't need to destroy the evidence. He just needed to point me to this folder. These drafts prove intent. They paint a picture of a rogue vice president acting alone, embezzling money behind the back of her trusting, benevolent boss. Elena felt sick, physically, violently sick. She gripped the edge of her desk, her nails digging into the wood. He wouldn't. He loves me. He loves his life, Lucas corrected. He loves the house in the Hamptons and the view from the 42nd floor. And he loves that you were willing to give him the keys to the only thing that could destroy it. He pushed a piece of paper across the desk. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a printed email dated 3 days ago. The sender was Julian Thorne. The recipient was the head of legal. Subject, concerns regarding operations leadership. I am becoming increasingly worried about the erratic behavior of Ms. Vance. I have noticed discrepancies in her reporting. I hesitate to accuse a loyal employee, but I believe an internal investigation might be necessary to protect the firm. The date, 3 days ago, before the dinner, before he told her to seduce Lucas. He reported you, Lucas said. He initiated the investigation himself. He brought me here, Elena, not the board, him. He hired the shark to eat you. The silence in the room was absolute. The hum of the ventilation system seemed to roar in. Elena's ears, the man she had slept with, the man she had compromised her ethics for, the man she had dreamed of a future with. He hadn't just betrayed her. He had constructed a cage, locked her inside, and handed the key to the executioner. Elena looked up at Lucas. He was watching her, waiting. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't triumphing in being right. He looked tired, as if breaking her heart was the hardest part of his job. Why are you showing me this? She whispered. You have the proof. You have the drafts. You could just arrest me. I could, Lucas admitted. He closed the laptop. But the timestamps on those drafts matched the GPS data from his phone, not yours. You were at a spa in Connecticut for 2 of them. You were at a conference in Chicago for another. He was sloppy because he didn't think anyone would look that closely. He thought I was just a clerk. He leaned forward. I can prove he framed you, but I can't prove he stole the money unless you testify, unless you walk into that boardroom and tell them exactly how the glitch worked. Elena stood up. She walked to the window, peering through the slats of the blinds. The office outside was still buzzing with the rumor of her disgrace. They were laughing at her. Julian was laughing at her, probably raising a glass of champagne with his wife right now, celebrating his narrow escape. The sadness in her chest began to harden. It cooled, crystallized, and turned into something sharp. He thinks I'm weak, Elena said, her voice trembling, but this time with rage. He thinks I'll go quietly because I love him. He thinks you're a clerk, Lucas said, echoing her own words back to her. He thinks you don't matter. Elena turned around. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing the expensive foundation. She didn't care. What do I need to do? Lucas opened his satchel again and pulled out a digital voice recorder. He set it on the desk between them. The small red light blinked, waiting. Start with the first time he asked you to change a number, Lucas said, and don't stop until you're done. Elena sat down. She looked at the recorder. She looked at Lucas, the man she had dismissed, the man who had seen her naked vulnerability on the balcony and had chosen to cover her instead of expose her. It was 2 years ago, Elena began, her voice steadying. It started with a logistics invoice for a warehouse that didn't exist. As she spoke, unraveling the tapestry of lies she had spent years weaving, she felt a strange sensation. It wasn't fear. It wasn't regret. It was the feeling of weight being lifted, pound by pound, from her shoulders. She was losing her career. She was losing her reputation. But for the first time in a long time, she was the one telling the story. The recording had lasted 2 hours, but the confession wasn't enough. Facts were cold, sterile things. Elena needed something else. She needed to look into the eyes of the man who had built a trap out of her. Affection, and see if there was any soul left behind the pinstripes. It was 10:01 p.m. when she swiped her key card for the private elevator to the penthouse. The building was empty, a hollow cathedral of silence. Julian had returned from the family birthday an hour ago. She knew because his driver had checked in with security, a protocol she had enforced herself. The elevator doors slid open. The penthouse office was bathed in low ambient light. Julian was there, sitting behind his massive oak desk, nursing a tumbler of whiskey. He looked tired, rubbing his temples, the picture of a burdened titan. He looked up as she stepped in. There was no warmth in his face, no surprise, only a flicker of annoyance, like a man dealing with a pest he thought he'd already exterminated. "I told you not to come up here, Elena," Julian said, his voice rough. "HR is monitoring the building access logs. Do you want to make it easy for them?" "They already have what they need," Elena said. She walked across the plush carpet, her heels sinking into the silence. She didn't stop until she was standing directly in front of his desk. "HR called me this morning about a conduct complaint. You were very thorough, Julian." Julian sighed. He took a sip of his drink, not breaking eye contact. "It was necessary. The audit is getting too close. We needed a diversion. An erratic, disgruntled employee explains a lot of inconsistencies." "I am the diversion," she stated, not asking. "You are the shield," Julian corrected. He stood up and walked to the window, turning his back on her. "It's temporary, Elena. You take the suspension. You let the investigation run its course. I'll make sure the severance package is generous, enough to start over somewhere else. Europe, maybe." He spoke of her exile as if he were planning a vacation. "And what about us?" Elena asked. The question hung in the air, fragile and stupid. Julian turned around. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time Elena saw the hollowness she had mistaken for depth. "Elena," he said, his tone patronizing, almost kind, "there is no us if there is no company. I am protecting the asset. That includes you, in a way. If you go down fighting, you go to prison. If you go down quietly, you go to Paris." "You used my login," she whispered. "You wrote those emails. You created a folder to frame me." Julian's face hardened. The mask slipped completely. "I did what I had to do to survive. That's what leadership is. You were happy enough to enjoy the dinners, the gifts, the access. Did you think that came for free? Everyone pays a tax, Elena. Yours is just coming due now." He checked his watch. "Go home. Pack a bag. Wait for my lawyers to call you in the morning. And for God's sake, stop looking at me like a wounded animal. It's embarrassing." It wasn't the betrayal that broke her. It was the boredom in his voice. To him, destroying her life wasn't a tragedy. It was a line item, a transaction cost. Elena felt the last tether snap, the fear, the love, the desperate hope. It all dissolved, leaving her standing in the cold clarity of the truth. "You're right," Elena said softly. "It is embarrassing." She turned and walked to the elevator. She didn't look back. She didn't slam the door. She just pressed the button for the lobby. 20 minutes later, a taxi dropped her off in a part of Brooklyn she hadn't visited in a decade. The street was lined with brownstones, quiet and unpretentious. She checked the address on the slip of paper Lucas had given her for emergencies. She walked up the steps and rang the buzzer. A moment later, the intercom crackled. "Yes?" "It's me," Elena said. Her voice was steady, clearer than it had been in years. "I'm done." The buzzer buzzed. She pushed the door open and climbed the 3 flights of stairs. Lucas was waiting in his doorway. He had changed into a t-shirt and sweatpants, looking younger, softer. He didn't ask what happened. He saw the void in her eyes where the illusion used to be. He stepped back, opening the door wide. "Come in," Lucas said. "The kettle is on." Elena stepped into the warmth of his apartment. It was small, cluttered with books and smelling of tea and old paper. It was real. "He offered me Paris," Elena said, standing in the middle of his living room, still clutching her designer bag like a shield. "He offered to pay me to disappear." "And?" Lucas asked, closing the door and locking the world out. Elena looked at him. "I don't want Paris. I want to burn it down." Lucas nodded slowly. He walked over to his desk where the laptop, her confession, was sitting. "Then let's get to work," he said. The deposition room was beige. Beige walls, beige carpet, beige table. It was the most unremarkable room Elena had ever been in, yet it was where the empire of Julian Thorne finally crumbled. Julian sat across from her, flanked by 3 lawyers in 3 different shades of expensive gray. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the stack of documents in the center of the table, the user logs, the GPS data, the M. Reynolds Incorporation papers. "Mr. Thorne," the federal prosecutor asked, her voice dry and unimpressed, "can you explain why the IP address used to create the fraudulent draft emails matches the private Wi-Fi network of your residence in Southampton?" Julian opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time in 10 years, he didn't have a charming quip. He didn't have a spin. He looked small. Elena sat perfectly still. She wasn't wearing the emerald silk dress or the power suit. She was wearing a simple white button-down and black slacks. Her hair was pulled back in a low ponytail. She felt lighter, as if she had shed a heavy skin. Lucas was there, sitting in the back corner of the room. He wasn't looking at the evidence. He was looking at her, offering a silent anchor in the storm. When the plea deal was read, it wasn't a victory parade. It was a surgical removal of a tumor. Julian Thorne would face 5 to 10 years for embezzlement and securities fraud. Elena Vance, for her cooperation and testimony proving coercion, would receive 2 years of probation and a lifetime ban from holding executive office in any publicly traded financial institution. She also agreed to forfeit any and all assets derived from the period of employment in question. That meant everything. The apartment on the Upper East Side, the car, the jewelry, even the emerald ring she had twisted on her finger during dinner with Lucas. When they left the courthouse, the paparazzi were waiting. Flashes exploded like lightning. A reporter shoved a microphone in her face. "Miss Vance! Miss Vance! Do you have any regrets? How does it feel to lose it all?" Elena stopped. She looked at the camera, then at the sleek black car waiting to whisk Julian away to his arraignment. "I didn't lose it all," she said, her voice calm and carrying over the noise. "I just paid the bill." She turned and walked away, not toward a waiting limo, but toward the subway station. 6 months later, the bell above the door chimed softly. It was a rainy Tuesday in Brooklyn, the kind of day that made the city feel intimate, washing away the grime and leaving only the gray cobblestones and the smell of wet pavement. Inside the Cobble Hill bookstore, it was warm. Elena stood behind the counter, organizing a stack of new arrivals. She wore a thick, knitted cardigan and no makeup. Her hands, once manicured to a lethal point, were now stained slightly with ink from stamping receipts. She wasn't a VP, she wasn't a girl boss. She was the manager of a struggling independent bookstore, earning a fraction of her old salary, and she slept 8 hours every bite of it. The door opened again, bringing a gust of cool air. "We close in 10 minutes, Elena called out without looking up from her inventory list. "I know," a voice said. "I just needed something to read on the train." Elena's pen stopped. She looked up. Lucas stood in the aisle, shaking raindrops off a black umbrella. He wasn't wearing the ill-fitting gray suit. He was wearing a dark pea coat and jeans. He looked healthier, less tired. The clerk disguise was gone, revealing the man underneath. "Lucas," she said. The name felt natural now, not like a weapon. He walked up to the counter. He didn't have any files. He didn't have a laptop. He just had his hands in his pockets and a small, tentative smile. "I heard the audit at Sterling and Houge finally wrapped up," he said. "They promoted me to partner." "Congratulations," Elena said. And she meant it. "You deserve it. You see things others miss." "I quit," Lucas said. Elena blinked. "You what?" "I quit," he repeated. He picked up a book from the display, a classic novel about reinvention. "I realized I was tired of looking for other people's mistakes. I wanted to start making some of my own." He looked at her then, his hazel eyes clear and direct. There was no power, dynamic here. No CEO and subordinate, no auditor and suspect. Just two people standing in a quiet room, stripped of their titles. "And," Lucas added, "I realized I missed the view." "There's no view here, Lucas," Elena said, gesturing to the rain-streaked window that looked out onto a brick wall. "No skyline, no champagne." "I wasn't talking about the skyline," he said softly. He reached across the counter, not to take a file, but to rest his hand near hers. "I was wondering if you're free for dinner. Not a working dinner, just dinner, somewhere with paper napkins and no waiting list." Elena looked at his hand, then she looked at the reflection in the window. She didn't see a fallen executive. She saw a woman who had survived the fall. She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "I'd like that," Elena said. "I'd like that very much." She untied her apron, laid it on the counter, and walked around to join him. They walked out into the rain together, two unremarkable people in a big city, finally writing a story that was entirely their own.